and I want to talk about process logic, and in particular, let's talk about conditional logic, the flow in workflow. This is a bit of a review for those of you that were here last time, but I want to I want to go down to this in more detail, and especially in the examples, look at some applications of this. So first, there's two basic varieties of conditional logic. You can check a condition which will conditionally do something if a condition is true. This has nothing to do with time. This is like if status is closed, or if estimated revenue is above some threshold, or if it's a certain type of a case, or a certain stage of a sales process. That's the basic if logic. We'll see plenty of examples of that. Then there are wait conditions. So if there's an element of time in your workflow, what wait conditions do, make a workflow stop and wait for what? Well, they can wait until a condition is met. So you're going to stop a workflow until, say, a task is completed, or until the sales stage changes, something along those lines. Or you can force a timeout until a date milestone is reached. So when I was first learning about how to do this, it was a little bit mystifying, so I'm going to spend some time on that, but it's a really important distinction that you got to make. So here's the basic check condition scenario. So this check condition, this is going to be the very first condition within a conditional block. And we'll see this in the process designer. Spend a little bit more time in there in the next demo. Then we have conditional branch or conditional branches. And then if you want, this is optional, but you can also have a default condition. So if anything else happens and you want some action to take place, now that's what the default condition would be for. The notes here are pretty much mechanical notes. I'd be the first to admit I'm not a partisan booster of the workflow designer. The workflow designer is getting a little long in the teeth and needs a refresh. You know, the CRM team is working on it. So you have to be, careful where to put your cursor location. You can nest these things as deeply as you need to, but you can't, take an existing action, for example, and embed it in a conditional block, right? So you have to have kind of your logic laid out first before you start. You don't want to do prototyping, basically, of a business process in the designer. If I'm trying to do some kind of a prototyping or documenting a process, I'd want to use Visio for that. I wouldn't necessarily want to use the process designer for that. Now, if you delete a stage, there's no impact on the actions that are within the stage, but if you do delete a conditional branch, you do delete everything that's underneath it. So you got to be careful about that. We'll see some examples of that. Wait conditions, two basic varieties I mentioned. There's a wait until a condition is met, then there's a timeout. These are different things. The timeout, basically, that's when you're waiting for the clock to tick, right? You time out until what? An opportunity goes past its estimated close date, or a case goes past some date milestone that's determined by a service level agreement and is relative to the date that the case was created, or something like that. So some examples: you might want to wait until a task is complete before progressing from one sales stage to another. Or on an opportunity or case, wait until there's some definition of past due. Wait until you hit that, then check and maybe take escalating actions if it's still open or active. Send email messages 1 week, 1 day before an event or before a subscription expires. There's all kinds of scenarios there. So here's the wait until timeout, and this slide's kind of small, but we'll show you this in the demo. There's a special work process option in 2011, and it gives you a timeout operator in the workflow designer. We're going to look at that. And then we have a parallel wait branch. So here's an interesting illustration of that. This workflow here, we're going to look at this in the demo in a minute. But notice we've got this thing divvied up into stages. That first stage, timeout, parallel wait branch for a 1-day warning. Right? So what we're doing here is waiting for time to pass. This is the timeout. And you can kind of see what's going on here. This is a workflow that enforces opportunities not to go past due, because we're going to time out until 1 day before the estimated close date. Then we send a 1-day warning email. And then in the part up here, we can see what happens with parallel wait branches. So you see what this does? We wait until the opportunity is lost or won, and then we just stop the workflow. Or we time out until a day before the close date. So this is a good example of a parallel wait branch. In the second part, here's where we catch the overdues. So we've already sent the 1-day warning, and then the workflow proceeds. We come down here to the second part, and now we're going to time out until a day after the opportunity close date, and then we're going to close out the record. So this is the draconian approach to enforcing opportunity estimated close dates not going past due. It also illustrates an important point that in the process designer, if you want to change the status reason value, right, we're going to close this out. We're going to basically use this change status action and specify the appropriate status region if we want to change the actual status. It's kind of an anomaly, but I'll show you how that works. Okay, so here are the examples that I want to look at for this chapter 3. These are pretty meaty. I think these are pretty interesting examples. And these are all in the solutions for chapter 3. So there's a case routing and escalation workflow that I want to drill down on. There's that overdue opportunity workflow that we just looked at that process using waits and timeouts and that sort of thing. And then those two workflows that I used as an illustration of scope and how to target workflows. In the last demo, I want to drill down on those. They're actually relatively interesting workflows. So in this manual sales process, we've already kind of seen how that works. Your selection of the sales stage, that's what progresses the sales process. But in what you might refer to as a gated sales process workflow, it's not selection of an option set value. It's actually doing something that progresses the sales process. There are pros and cons with this from a business standpoint. The decision, whether you do one of these or the other, I think has more to do with business-specific issues really than technical issues. It can be a little bit confusing, I think, sometimes for users to, with the manual sales process workflow, it's pretty obvious what's going on. With the gated sales process, you need to be a little introspective and sort of think to yourself, okay, well, when I do these things, that's what's going to progress the sales process, not driving it directly. But we'll take a look at that. And there's a bunch of factoids that this demo I'm going to show you next illustrates. These are just some of the more important ones. There's a bunch of other ones too. This is a review of how you use scope to target automatic workflows, and I'm going to switch it up a little bit here and show you how you change that. Conditional logic and wait, that's illustrated here. There's also an important interaction of these sales pipeline, these sort of sales process workflows and the sales pipeline report. And that to me is one of these things that once you see it, you kind of get it. But the first time you see it, it's like, what? Scratch your head a little bit on that one. It turns out that the built-in sales pipeline report, it's a pretty good report. It's a really nice out-of-the-box report, but it's designed relatively specifically to take advantage of a certain type of a workflow, and I want to make sure you understand that. This last point, this processes and solutions thing, I'm going to develop this in a lot more detail in another session in the series, which is there's a chapter, I think it's chapter maybe 6, where I go into solutions and how processes are solution components and things like that. But just a highlight here, just to kind of introduce this, because it is an important point. And it also could be something that some of you, if you purchase the book and have the solutions, you might be struggling a little bit with. Processes are solution components. That's how I was able to create those solutions. I put all the workflow and dialogue processes in them. And processes can also depend on data. So for example, queues. A lot of case routing workflows, and we're going to take a look at this, you might route cases to queues under certain conditional scenarios. But they can also use other data too, sales literature. You can attach a knowledge base article to a case with a workflow. And all of those things Sales literature, cues, knowledge base articles, they are not solution components. So it's kind of interesting. You can have a solution component have effectively a dependency, and I use that term with a small d because it's not a dependency in the sense of a solution not being able to import without those things. But you can have that dependency on things that are not solution components. You can include those in a solution. So then you import the solution. You might need to create the data before you can activate the process. I'm going to show you an illustration of that. Okay, so that is what we're going to look at now. So let me switch out here.